Good morning. Please be seated. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I extend a warm Kingswood welcome to you all. The opening words, as said by Nelson Mandela soon after his retirement from public office, resonate today and serve as a reminder to us all of our duty as citizens in a world where injustice still exists. We gather today to honor the memory of Neil Aggett and all those brave men and women who laid down their lives in the fight for human rights and social justice. Firstly, to Dr. Mkhize, we are honored that you made the time to play a role in today's service, and we thank you for being part of this auspicious occasion in our calendar. A welcome to Mr. Richard Gaber, Councillor and Vice Chair of the OK Club. To all who have joined us virtually today, heads of schools, staff, special guests, parents, and members of the Grahamstown community, we welcome you all. To the current pupils of Kingswood College, I welcome you as well. As the youth of our society, I hope that what you take away from today will enhance and serve to remind you of the important role you play in making a difference in this world. At this 15th Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture, I extend a special word of welcome to Mr. Neil Hartzenberg, who, with a team of others, and I mention in particular Mr. Rob Charlton and Mr. Keith James, have preserved, inspired, and organized this event over a number of years. You have, through this annual event, kept the memory of Neil Aggett alive at Kingswood and have instilled in our past and our current learners values that will continue to impact on society in a positive manner. I ask you to please stand. We take a moment of silence to acknowledge and to recognize the passing of King Goodwill Zwelithini, as well as the President of Tanzania. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to call upon our Mr. Hartzenberg to do an introduction and a setting for today's Neil Aggett Lecture.
Every year at Kingswood College, we host this memorial lecture in honor of Dr. Neil Aggett, a former Kingswood pupil who lost his life during the anti-apartheid struggle for liberation. This lecture is a tribute to all of those who have lost their lives in the fight for human rights and social justice, as we've already heard. Good morning to you all. It's my honor to be here with you this morning, just to share, by way of an introduction, why we are here at this point in time, right now. So I start with trying to answer the question, who was Neil Aggett? Many of you would be aware that he matriculated at Kingswood College in December 1970. And this was with a first-class pass. He was clearly a good academic. He had spent 7 years at Kingswood as a boarding school pupil. Was in Gainhouse in senior school. I was in grade 9 at Kingswood in his final year. So Kingswood was a little bit smaller then. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him well, unfortunately. But what I do know is that we both share a very fine first name. In his last year at Kingswood, Neil's leadership skills and the gentle nature of his leadership skills were particularly recognized, and he was the head prefect of Jake's House, which was then the junior school boarding house. It was during this time at Kingswood and later while training to become a medical doctor at UCT that he took notice of and was shocked by the serious deprivation of basic human rights in South African society. It's clear that these realizations seriously affected and influenced his life choices thereafter. In 1977, he started as an intern doctor at Mthatha General Hospital, later worked at Tembisa and then Baragwanath Hospital in Gauteng, and during this time he became increasingly frustrated by the hardships endured by Blackens under the apartheid regime. In response to this frustration, he obviously and clearly decided to roll up his sleeves and get involved in making a difference for the better. So he abandoned his promising medical career and became involved in the growing, but still at that time illegal and unregistered black trade union movement. He worked on weekends as a hospital casualty doctor to earn some income, whilst helping during the week without pay factory workers get organized into trade unions to help them fight for the basic working conditions which we all expect to be provided. Legendary trade union leader Oscar Mpeta very accurately described Neil as a man of the people. Then came the tragedy. He was detained for interrogation by the South African Security Police towards the end of 1981, and on the 5th of February 1982, at the age of 28, he was found hanging in his cell in John Vorster Square, the police station in Johannesburg Central, and no charge was ever formally laid against him. So, this memorial lecture, together with the memorial window, which is up behind me, and the awarding of the Neil Aggett Award, together serve to commemorate and at the same time encourage Kingswoodians, especially, but not only to value the selfless contribution made by the special old Kingswoodian, but also to encourage the growth of a strong sense of social justice in everyone of our staff, pupils, and community, helping us all to become stronger social justice activists wherever we are involved at all times, following Neil Aggett's example. I was also asked to say a little bit about the Neil Aggett Award. So this is the background. I mentioned the stained glass window behind me. This was commissioned and installed soon after Neil's tragic death as a result of requests and donations, mostly from his school friends. This formal annual lecture format, which was initiated in 2006 at the suggestion of a Kingswood history pupil who had done a matric project on Neil Aggett's life, together with his history teacher, Mr. Robert Charlton. So they instituted it as a formal annual event. Previously, ad hoc memorial lectures and events had been held in Neil's memory and to recognize his contribution. Anyway, then in 2010, at the 40-year reunion of Neil Aggett's 1970 matric class. So his matric class got together 40 years later at a Kingswood reunion, and under the leadership of the late Brian Sandberg, this class, the members of this class decided to donate a very special sculpture to be used as a trophy and requested it to be named the Neil Aggett Award. Now this statuette, which you see on the table in front of us, was crafted by an exceptional Eastern Cape African sculptress. And it's particularly relevant because Neil was a very creative soul. And in our city, is the home of the National Arts Festival as well. So the statue or the trophy in the minds of this class represents someone of no specific race, proud and tall, broad-shouldered and strong-legged, and firmly committed to social service in the face of the struggle to fight human suffering and social injustice that exists within South Africa and the wider humanity. So the purpose of this award is to foster a spirit of individual service above self in young men and women of Kingswood College. It specifically should pay tribute to the recipient's true commitment to a wider social responsibility within the college as well as in the local and national community. The class of 1970 believes that Neil Aggett's life should be considered a true vocation that centered around a tireless calling to community service for the betterment of his society at large. For him, there was clearly no desire for any material accumulation in his life, but rather his focus lay with the betterment of those lives he could personally serve. For me, the following specific lessons on community outreach are reinforced by what we can call the Neil Aggett way. And there are 3 points. Make sure that you clearly understand the community problems around you. Secondly, commit yourself to doing something meaningful and constructive with those affected. And thirdly, do it even if it means sacrificing a more comfortable lifestyle for yourself. In closing, we need to remember that Neil Aggett served the Johannesburg factory workers community as an elected, unpaid, and fully accountable trade union official. He gently guided and trained others by his example as he quietly went about his invaluable community work. I thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to what we're going to hear going forward. I just want to say, please, we must together ensure that the memory of Neil Aggett lives on through our actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartzenberg, for that introduction. Let's give Mr. Hartzenberg another round of applause, please. We've come to the exciting part in the program. I have the privilege this morning of announcing the recipient of the 2021 Neil Aggett Award. And so I would like the following individual to please join me. And once the person is up front, if you would join me in a round of applause, I call upon Wanda Madasa. The recipient of this year's Neil Aggett Award is a young woman of great character who has played many leadership roles in the college and impressed all those who she's come into contact with. Her commitment to serving others is evident in the many initiatives that she's been involved with through Interact and other platforms, as well as the projects that she has initiated. Having met the coordinator of the Food for Futures project in Makhanda last year, she invited her to be a speaker at the Interact gathering and then initiated a project that supported Food for Futures through the collection and distribution of food and school shoes to community groups. She is actively involved in the President's Award Youth Movement in Makhanda, being the Kingswood representative for their One Sock project, as well as doing a book drive to supply local libraries with more reading material. She is also the deputy head of the Interact Club at Kingswood. On the engagement front, she's been a part of the Mary Waters Maths Project, which pairs up Kingswood pupils with partners from the local Mary Waters High School to strengthen understanding and achievement in mathematics. She has also assisted with reading activities at the Lebone Center and initiated contact with Mkhize's, the local old age home. Further involvement includes being a part of the #Sizimbukoto initiative that enables women and young girls to discuss issues of femininity and be provided with sanitary pads, as well as being a volunteer facilitator at the Ulwazi High School summer camp near her home of East London. Demonstrating her commitment to the younger members of the Kingswood community and living out her Christian ethos, she heads up the Kids with a Mission team for junior school pupils, as well as being a senior chapel steward in charge of communion and a devotions leader for the junior school girls in Hobson House. She is described as someone with moral courage and integrity, who demonstrates an understanding of social and environmental issues and has the ability to reflect and make thoughtful decisions. Kingswood College is proud to confer the prestigious Neil Aggett Award on Wanda Madasa, our head girl. I would like to invite the other heads of school, please, to come up and congratulate Wanda. And then I would like Mr. and Ms. Madasa, her parents, to please come join us in the front as well. Thank you. The Aggett family have done something different this year. They were aware that this would be a virtual ceremony, and so they requested that the flowers that they would normally purchase to leave in the chapel, that we must please give to the recipient's parents. I now call upon Mr. Richard Gaber, a councillor and vice chair of the Old Kingswoodian Club, to introduce our speaker. Thank you, Mr. Gaber.
Introducing the Honourable Minister Zweli Mkhize shouldn't be a difficult task. The Financial Mail named him Man of the Year. The Business Day dubbed him as the Newsmaker of the Year. Google is filled with content on him, and yet writing this introduction has been exceedingly hard. Having had the opportunity to work with him, liaise with him over a number of years, Dr. Mkhize has become a real person as opposed to some obscure political figure that one reads about. I don't want this introduction to be a long list of his achievements, and for those interested in them, please do read his speaker's profile in the program. The Business Day describes him as a doctor, minister, patient, tireless leader, big brother, often the bearer of bad news, and even a dancer. These were the many masks worn by the Health Minister Zweli Mkhize in 2020. This eloquently illustrates the multidimensional aspects of this formidable man. I would beg your indulgence to listen to the most incredible story of the days leading up to today's address. Hopefully, that will be an insight enough into the man from which we are about to hear. Sadly, Dr. Mkhize needed to cancel the live stream as he had to play an integral role in honoring His Majesty the late King Goodwill Zwelithini, who is being buried today. It should be noted that the King is considered a family member and a father figure to the Minister. As I heard the news, I was shattered at the prospects of the Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture not going ahead as planned. Ironically, COVID-19 has taught us that not much goes according to plan. However, out of the blue, I received a message. He doesn't want to let the pupils down. Immediately, I realized a plan was being hatched. It also dawned on me that the Minister understood this dress was about you, the pupils, and Neil Aggett. Without spoiling Dr. Mkhize's address, I can share with you that Dr. Vasilio, Wanda, Sibu, Darius, Ezola, and I had the most insightful and special afternoon yesterday engaging with Dr. Mkhize on Zoom. I am certain they, nor I, will ever forget that Zoom call. Let me put what happened in perspective again. The National Minister of Health, during a pandemic, during a deeply difficult time of laying his king to rest, took hours out of his day to engage with Kingswood pupils because he cares, and he cares about you. Please join me in virtually welcoming the Honourable Minister of Health, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, as the guest of honour and keynote speaking for the 2021 Neil Aggett Memorial Lecture.
Mr. James Huff, the family and friends of Neil Aggett, Mrs. Gil Berger, and Miss Elizabeth Floyd. I especially would like to greet all the pupils at Kingswood College, as well as their head girls and head boys. My apologies as well. I greet you this morning at a time of great sadness where we mourn the loss of Isilo Samabandla, His Majesty King Goodwill Zwelithini. And I may as well say that it has been very sad that in the past year, we have lost several, monarchs of our people. We have the loss of Tulare. We have the Queen of Amachachabe. We have also lost Zolonke, the king of Amagalega, and we are very greatly saddened by this very severe loss. To my involvement in the preparation for His Majesty's funeral, I'm unable to join you live, but it is a very special privilege for me to be addressing you today. And I hope there will also be a time when we can meet in person when we are outside these COVID regulations. It is a special day for me to pay tribute to Dr. Neil Aggett. We gather today in memory of Comrade Neil Aggett, who died in detention at John Foster Square. Aggett is of a greater good of many, when for the high principles of justice, equity, and fairness. And from the life of Comrade Neil Aggett, we draw lessons of the struggle. That the struggle is a collective effort. It's a journey to a more humane society, which is the one in which we walk together through many of the hardships and the sacrifices that will cost us as individuals. But at the end of the day, we also do understand that the struggle is waged by ordinary individuals, and in the case of South Africa, as ordinary South Africans from all walks of life who actually sacrificed to make sure that we get the South Africa that we have today. And it is important for us to always look back and pay tribute to all of those who made those sacrifices, many of whom actually paid the most supreme sacrifice and lost their lives. Comrade Aggett was born in 1953. It was about 3 years before I was born. He was a medical doctor by training, and in his work he saw how health outcomes were directly linked to the social inequities and oppression in society. Aggett realized that to diagnose the body as if it's outside of the social context does not successfully solve the problem of disease. In fact, to solve the diseases, you often have to take a holistic view of society. So for Neil Aggett, disease was a medical scientific question as well as a social question. The current COVID-19 pandemic has been a stark reminder that disease is not an individual problem, but is a societal problem and responsibility. Pandemics remind us that a disease can hit all of society, and thus the remedy must involve all of society. COVID-19 has forced us to cooperate to save lives and slow down the pandemic. All the interventions we have put in place depend on each person thinking about the next person. COVID-19 forces you to have to ask, if I go out partying or socializing, will I bring back the disease to the vulnerable members of my family? Everyone would indicate now that one major contributor to the second wave that we saw towards the end of last year was actually linked to a huge partying spree that young people were involved in, but out of which they thought that because they were well, they were healthy, there was no problem. In order to discover afterward that it was a super spread event that ended up causing more people to be affected and infected. And as it would happen, most of the young people tended to quickly shed the infection without serious symptoms, but those members of the family, the elderly, those with comorbidities, had to succumb as a result of that. This disease, therefore, makes you ask the question about someone else's well-being, even before your own, because this is a situation where the next person may actually be worse off if you actually got them infected. COVID-19 also reminds us that there's no way any human being or any country can be an island to itself. We have an expression now that says, no one is safe unless everyone is safe, which is the approach we use as we now utilizing the vaccination to say every country needs to have access to the vaccines so that you can make sure that all our people are safe. Because one small pocket of people who may not be vaccinated because maybe they have got no means to access vaccines might actually generate a kind of variant that can worsen the disease, that can again affect even those who might have been vaccinated. So the issue of you are not alone, we have to think of others. It becomes very important. So COVID-19 forces you to have to ask, if I go out partying or socializing, will I bring back the disease to the vulnerable members of my family? History has it now, and as we record the last wave, that people who were partying, who without symptoms were spreading the infection because they were involved in what is called a super spreader activity. And as a result, many people got infected out of that. So at this point in our fight against COVID-19, we believe it's important for everyone in South Africa to have access to vaccination. At this point, we have started the process of vaccination. It's important to remove the myths and the disinformation about the vaccination so that everybody gets the benefit of the prevention of the COVID-19, in particular, because we have seen how the virus can mutate and give us much more severe effect than what we've been exposed to before. So it's important for all South Africans to have some kind of immunity based on the access to the vaccines. We're also saying that the vaccination program is a global human effort to save humanity. It is about ensuring that every country has access to vaccines, irrespective of their capacity to manufacture vaccines, or even the level of resources that each country commands. It's important to also say that for countries that are well resourced, they should be able to assist those which are not well resourced, because that's an act of justice, of equity, where no country gets left behind. It's important as well to say we will not be safe unless everyone is safe. So the lesson that we have learned is that COVID-19 has actually brought back that basic lesson of Ubuntu, that we are responsible for each other's well-being. My experience as a young doctor, I think I would just wish to reflect on that a little bit, because I've been dealing with diseases and pandemics for over 40 years. When I was a young medical student training in the University of Natal, it was here where I began to observe that disease was as much a scientific problem as it was a social question. I went to the University of Natal, a black section, as it was called in the late 70s to mid-80s. It was a campus where many activists, such as Black consciousness leader Stephen Bantu Biko, had attended, though he did not complete. But in this particular university, you still had to get special permission to be black, as a black student, to attend to the university, because not only was it a white-only university, but also the hospital was in what was designated a white area, wherein any black person has to be there by permits from the Minister of Bantu Affairs of those days. Now, this to us was an abnormal society. In some instances, actually, it was so difficult that you had most of the top leadership who were black professors and specialists and consultants who had to get special permission to go and treat patients in a whites-only hospital, until they said, no, we will not do so. We cannot go and treat patients where we cannot ourselves be treated. That is how government relented, because the best of the topmost specialists could not treat patients in whites-only hospitals, because they needed to have permission for that. As an intern, even, I had to go and ask for special permit from the government to go and work in McCord's hospital, which was said to be in a white area. As a doctor, it was not enough to say I was qualified, but because I was not white, then I had to get the special permission. That is the nature of the time that we actually lived through those particular times. We realized then that health was not something that you learn about in the medical textbooks, but also it's about keenly observing our own society and our own people's problems in our own context. We ran young students' clinics, and we were able to ultimately learn that at the end of it, health is an indicator of the level of socio-economic development of society. That health is an indicator of the political systems under which people live. That health is not just about one person. You can treat one person, but a problem, that is manifested based on the political, socio-economic circumstances may not be solved only by just dealing with one person's symptom. And this is how we've dealt with it. This is the same lesson that we have learned from COVID-19. From the point of view of the health system, we treat individuals with the COVID-19 manifestations. However, we want to defeat COVID-19, we need mobilization of our society, socially, culturally, taking into account religious and all sorts of other different aspects of our lives to be able to focus all our energies to fight this pandemic. And so we learned that you cannot separate the treatment of patients who are sick from the problems of having to fight for equality in education. And I was a student at that time. I was a student leader, the president of the Student Representative Council. I led many campaigns for free education. When you see today the students talking about free education, these are the campaigns we led almost 40 years ago, when you demanded textbooks for the children, equal syllabus and curriculum for blacks-only schools, and have one sort of education for all the people of South Africa. We had to deal with the issues of equality before the law, where we wanted that there must be a supreme law of the land that must make sure that we are all protected equally, irrespective of our race, our color, our religion. In this case, it was a very, very important issue that we fight until you got the constitution adopted in South Africa, wherein the basic human rights are enshrined, where there's equality before the law, that everyone's human rights shall be respected. All of these were the issues that we as students were fighting for. And this is what Dr. Neil Aggett was actually involved in, also working for the improvement of the conditions of the workers, where he went out to go and mobilize workers in various industries to help them to organize themselves so they cannot be exploited. You may ask yourself, what did the doctor have to do with all of that? But at the basic, the issues of food security, income security, are the basic determinants of health for individuals, which means, therefore, if you are a doctor, you have to look at the entirety of your patient's surroundings so that you can understand the cause of illness and good health in those particular communities. It is also important that as young people, we must always be free to dream and follow our vision. And this is what we all had to, when we were young, a passion for a better life, a passion for a much more equitable society, a society where there's equality. And this is important because during our days, this could not be possible because of apartheid laws. And I think the young people today should appreciate the fact that because of that, young people can dream of anything about their future, and they can actually now restrict their dreams and their visions about the future. So it's important when we talk about, one aspect of ensuring equity is to make sure that you've got a health system that allows people to be treated on the basis of the ill health, the diseases they have, not on whether they've got medical aid, not on whether they've got money to pay, whether they're unable to pay, because there are conditions that can be so unaffordable to the individuals that individuals actually end up with their lives compromised simply because the health services are not geared towards serving all the South Africans. So we have then learned that we had to be scientists, doctors, community practitioners, if we're going to be good enough doctors to deal with disease in our unjust society. So part of looking at improving the lives of our patients was about fighting apartheid, fighting injustice, fighting for fairness. And when Dr. Neil Aggett did what he did, he went all out. He understood this essence that being a doctor to treat one person is not enough. What's important is how we treat the entire society, as it were. So we're going to learn how to diagnose the body as well as the social, political system in which people live. At this point, I can indicate that there's a huge difference between the community that I lived in when I was a young student. So, for example, when the new dispensation, had to focus on provision of water piped water, sanitation, that actually closed down a number of wards where young people, children, were actually admitted with diarrhea. Well, lots of children were dying because of diarrhea, but today we know that that is preventable. It has nothing to do with a good doctor. It's got to do with good water system, sanitation, and so on. When we look at people who are dying of diseases such as tuberculosis, chest infections, the issues of overcrowding, people living in slums and informal settlements, that's where the real solution of these issues. So we've got a program of housing, human settlement, building houses and assisting. It actually reduces those types of diseases. When you got support for the indigent children who have no breadwinners in their homes, and then you get support so that they can actually get something to eat. You have actually closed down what we used to call kwashiorkor wards. These are the wards where a child would come in, because of malnutrition. They have a huge tummy, a big liver, and they're looking morose. And after a few days of normal good feeding, then they start smiling. They become nice little chubby children because they've actually been treated of malnutrition. As soon as they get back to their community, and again, you've got a problem because this thing, again, recurs. So there are specific conditions which we know for a fact that you cannot treat just the individual. You have to look at the overall treatment of the society as a whole. We need to say to ourselves as young people, there are things we must have the passion and the love to serve our communities, to serve our societies, do everything that we need to do to make sure that our communities leaders, so that the leaders who they put in place must take decisions based on what is it they will do to improve the lives of the people. It's part of it. It is not separate, but it's how you actually make sure you've got, a healthy society. If you look at communities where there's no education, just to improve the lives of children and reduce the death of children, you need to improve the lives of the mothers, the education of the mothers. Some research was done where it was demonstrated by taking the mother from primary school to secondary school, you can reduce the numbers of children who die by 50%, which basically says that it is too narrow to look at just one person's symptom. For every one person's symptom, you must then look at the public health policy and look at the political system under which all of those people are governed. I would therefore say the challenge to you is to look back at a number of young people who went all out to challenge the system, to mobilize our people, to encourage our people to fight in the struggle for democracy. That those were the people who were actually the catalysts for change that our people needed to improve their lives, so that you not only just have to treat one person, but the entire society works together for the improvement of the entire nation. And therefore, as South Africans, as young people, we urge you to focus on education, to focus on ensuring that you understand why you're being educated, and that is to solve the challenges of society. I always say to young people when they go through education, to become a leader, education must help us with three things. Firstly, it needs to give you technical knowledge, know-how, so that you know what to do and you can solve particular problems. Secondly, it needs to give you integrity, where you know that you have to be a dependable leader that will be able to fight for good governance and fight corruption, and that such a leader is a leader who can be trusted by the community as a whole. But thirdly, that you need to have social consciousness of understanding that it doesn't matter what training you get. At the end of it, you are an investment by society to resolve their own challenges, their own problems. So whatever you do, you are out there as an investment of our society to change some of the challenges that we face as society, so that we get a better community, a better society because of your contribution. So those three things are important. One of the leaders of our country was John Dube, who was John Dube, who was the first president of the African National Congress. He actually came from the US with a special understanding of what education needed to do. And he said, you train the head, you train the hand, you train the heart. Effectively, all that this was, it was about technical skills, it was about a good spirit and integrity, the philosophy of Ubuntu, and of course, training the head, which is academic knowledge. So all of these for us are what must come back to our minds as we think back and take the inspiration from people who have fought our struggle in our struggle to bring about democracy, to bring about justice, to bring about fairness, to bring about equity. And those people actually made a contribution, but they continue to be an inspiration for many generations for the work they've done. We therefore want to thank the Kingswood College for inviting me at this time. I do wish that the circumstances were different, but nevertheless, I thank you. I want to say, as young people, please focus on the future, because it's your vision that's going to help us change society. Thank you very much.
I'm going to call upon our head girl, Wanda Madasa. Wanda, would you like to ask the Minister the first question, please?
Yes, please. Good morning, Honorable Minister.
Morning, Wanda.
I'd like to start off with a question which you touched on, which I was very grateful for. It asks, Neil Aggett was a medical doctor who was invested in political matters. How can the medical field in South Africa be used as a tool of social justice?
Thank you very much, Wanda. I think what is important is for us to understand that for every person with symptoms, that individual can be treated and they can improve. But that is not the end of the disease. The pandemic moves from one person to the other. It depends on the behavior of the entire society. It depends on how closely we relate and how we understand the need for the precautions to stop the infection. And so what is important now is that COVID-19 has gone beyond just worrying about one individual. It's gone to a point where we have to mobilize all our people to learn from science, to know what are the basics of what makes you ill and what will keep you safe and healthy. Secondly, what are the things that are other social or cultural activities that we need to alter to be able to change our lives so that we can reduce the spread of the infection. And then understand as well that cultures and traditions are coded activities that have been passed from generation to generation based on best practices and best outcomes. So what would have happened in the past that saved many people, then they ingrained it into what is called a culture. So say you do this, sometimes you don't know why, but you. So if you spoke to me about 2 years ago and said people must come together and wear masks and stay more than situations and not hug each other and so on, I would have said that's ridiculous. But now a new intervention has come in that has caused us to change our culture. But the point is therefore that we need to understand that we need to be led by science to change the way we behave so that we can save lives. And that is how we need to go out to the community. At that level, it's important that all the leaders must say the same thing. The teachers, the church leaders, the traditional leaders, the government leaders, the councillors, the business people, anyone who stands in front of people and give direction must say the same thing about the same problem. Then we'll actually have a new culture that helps us change to save our lives, to save our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to now ask Sibulele Zweni, our head boy. Sibulele, would you like to ask the Minister a question?
Yes, please, ma'am. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. I only have one question. So our ceremony is about standing up for injustices. So how do you think that
Thanks,
relates
Zweli.
to the pandemic 21st century context? So in other words, do you think fighting for injustice is the same in today's time?
Very interesting question. Firstly, that, Martin Luther King Jr. said something to this effect that for evil to thrive, all it takes is for good people to say nothing, to be silent. In other words, in our entire lives, we shall always need people who are going to stand up for justice and actually fight against injustice. Injustice is something that happens if people are not able to wield a similar amount of power to be able to push back on the forces of injustice. Because injustice will come from issues of people wanting to get more power out of greed, out of self-interest. So to balance self-interest, you need people who are going to focus on the provision of public good, something that must help everyone equally. So there will always be a need for us to be always looking out to fight for justice. It might be relatively different. In the time at which we grew up, the issue was a stark contrast between the current government and the previous ones, in the sense that people didn't have a word as to who gets elected to be their leaders. Now that you've got the, people have got the ability to now vote for the people that they want, they can at least ensure that there's justice. If they don't like one particular leader, they can actually change and vote for another leader. Now they've got the power in their hands. When in the past it was not so. That's why it was important to actually go through a struggle. And some of us had to go through a real, hard struggles to involve, military activity and all of that. But for every society, there should always be a sense of vision as to where society should be because of the leaders who lead them through that vision, and therefore they will help them to solve the problems that bring about inequality, that bring about poverty. They must be able to fight against poverty. Education, equally so, it's not whether your family can afford school, but it's whether your potential can be developed to its maximum. If we don't have access to services, then we still have an injustice that we must fight for. So that means even though we've now fought for that kind of education, when you talk about issues of violence, gender-based violence, as long as there's gender-based violence, there's injustice that we need to fight about. When we've got substance abuse, all the youth and the children are getting exposed to drugs and abused by syndicates, there's injustice that must be fought. When there's poverty, and we need to actually find a dispensation that's going to ensure that people can get adequate employment, food security, and enough knowledge to be able to lead their own lives, there is still a lot to be fought. What I always make a distinction for young people is that you have a difference. The previous government was not our government. So we used to demonstrate, we used to protest, we used to go into violent demonstrations and so on because we wanted to take it down. Here you've got a